Japan's modern naval force, known as the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force, or the JMSDF, has a reputation for competence, high technology, and quality in general. It is also reasonably large. Its fleets consist of around 160 vessels, including nearly 24 attack submarines, a corps of guided missile destroyers, numerous smaller destroyers and escort ships, frigates, amphibious warfare ships, and 4 light carriers. Total displacements for the JMSDF is about 700,000 tons, making it the 4th largest navy in the world when measured by tonnage. A casual glance would suggest a large navy able to control the seas around East Asia. Yet, strength measured purely in whole numbers or tonnage paints only half the picture. Beneath that impressive exterior lies a set of paradoxes. Significant strengths in some mission areas, but also vulnerabilities that are rarely discussed. Japan's fleet looks balanced from afar, but up close it shows a force highly optimized for battles in nearby waters, while lacking power projection capabilities that are strategically vital for an island nation dependent on maritime lifelines. In this video, we will cover the impressive capabilities of the JMSDF, but at the same time, this will be a critical analysis. We will show the key shortcomings that are preventing Japan from becoming truly a world-class naval power. After Japan's defeat in the Second World War, its new constitution, imposed under American oversight, renounced war as a means to resolve international disputes, and with it, the ability to maintain military forces with offensive power projection. However, the United States quickly found itself facing a growing Soviet naval challenge and needed military alliances in the Pacific. Japan's modern navy was recreated with the purpose of anti-submarine warfare, a capability clearly defensive in nature. The Soviet Union was developing a considerable submarine fleet that threatened American control of the Pacific Ocean. Washington encouraged Japan to develop a maritime arm designed to hunt Soviet submarines and defend the Northern Pacific approaches. As a result, throughout the Cold War, Japan built destroyers and frigates geared heavily towards anti-submarine warfare missions. Ship designs emphasized sonar suites, torpedoes, depth charge launchers, and later anti-submarine missiles and helicopters. This legacy shaped Japan's naval capability and fleet identity for decades. Even as Japan diversified its navy, starting in the later stages of the Cold War, the imprint of this past remains. Anti-submarine warfare is still the area where Japan arguably excels the most. This is reflected in Japan's second-tier destroyers, or roughly 30 or so ships. They are smaller than the Aegis destroyers that Japan also has, but are formidable submarine hunters. These vessels, generally displacing between 6,000 and 7,000 tons, are built around towed array sonars, variable depth sonars, helicopters, and long endurance that is necessary for sustained patrol to guard against submarines. The Asahi class, introduced in 2018, the Takanami class from 2003, and the Marusame class from the late 1990s were all purpose-designed for anti-submarine warfare and offer robust underwater detection ability. These ships may not have the sheer amount of missile batteries comparable to front-line air defense destroyers, but they excel at patrolling areas behind the front line, listening for contact, and neutralizing enemy submarines. Beyond ASW destroyers, Japan is building one of its most modern surface platforms, the Mogami-class frigate. This is Japan's take on a stealthy frigate, again weighted heavily towards anti-submarine capabilities, equipped with a comprehensive sonar suite, anti-submarine missiles launched from vertical launch cells, mine warfare systems, and even unmanned underwater vehicles designed for mine clearing. It is highly automated and technologically advanced, especially in stealth capabilities. The integrated radar mast on the Mogami is the prime example of this innovation. It allows radar and communication devices to be hidden so as to mitigate their radar signature, but at the same time minimize the interference caused by having so many different electronic systems so close to each other. However, the Mogami is not a general-purpose warship in the way that European frigates might be. Instead, Japan built it to excel in the mission area it values the most. Even the older ships that Japan has kept in service, such as the Asagiri-class destroyers and the Abukuma-class destroyer escorts, may not impress anybody in wider naval warfare roles, but they still contribute meaningfully to different layers of anti-submarine defenses in a naval contest. Japan also deploys helicopter carriers, though it calls them helicopter destroyers for constitutional reasons. Actually, while the Hyuga class remains classified as helicopter destroyers, the Izumo class has been reclassified into the so-called aircraft-carrying cruisers. So far, they are still not called aircraft carriers, as that would carry an offensive connotation. But boy, we're getting close. Naming aside, the Izumo and Hyuga classes are essentially small carriers operating numerous anti-submarine helicopters. These platforms serve as command hubs for undersea warfare, allowing multiple aircraft to take off, spread sensors across hundreds of kilometers of ocean, and track submarines. The Izumo class has begun conversion to operate the F-35B STOVL fighter, giving Japan its first carrier-based fixed-wing combat aviation since the 1940s. However, the conversion is gradual, and until it is mature, anti-submarine duty remains the core mission of these small carriers. The JMSDF's air component reinforces the same priority. Japan operates around 80 fixed-wing maritime patrol aircraft and about as many anti-submarine helicopters. The legacy P-3 Orion and the newer indigenous Kawasaki P-1 represents a major submarine surveillance fleet. Maritime patrol aircraft have the advantage of a large capacity for sonobuoys, typically around 100 depending on the aircraft, which are far more than helicopters. Fixed-wing patrol aircraft can obviously travel much faster and further. Helicopters, however, still have a role. The helicopters, mostly variants of the Seahawk, offer dipping sonar, torpedoes, and long loiter time to prosecute hostile submarines. The effectiveness of these aviation units against underwater threats depends heavily on whether they can operate without interference from enemy fighters, and of course sea-based air defenses. Together with Japan's surface fleet, they form arguably one of the best anti-submarine warfare ecosystems in the world. The JMSDF began investing seriously in air defense capabilities starting in the 1980s. In the later stages of the Cold War, the Soviet Union increasingly deployed in the Pacific long-range naval bombers and cruise missiles capable of striking Japanese naval forces from afar, creating a threat that Japan's fleet was not designed to counter. By the 1980s, the arrival of platforms like the Tupolev Tu-22M naval bomber, armed with the supersonic Kh-22 cruise missiles, forced Japanese planners to acknowledge that their navy could no longer survive without robust naval air defense. This culminated in Japan acquiring the Aegis combat system from the United States and constructing air defense warships such as the Congo class, marking a decisive transition from a purely anti-submarine force towards a more balanced navy with formidable air defenses. Currently, the 8 Aegis destroyers form the most valuable part of Japan's maritime air defense network. The 4 vessels of the Congo class, followed by 2 Otago class and 2 Maya class destroyers, are the closest Japan has to true multi-role destroyers with long-range air warfare functions. They integrate electronically scanned large panel radar with the Aegis combat system and extensive missile batteries housed in vertical launch cells. They can defend other ships against aircraft and missiles, and, perhaps more importantly, contribute to ballistic missile defense. Japan has invested heavily in intercepting incoming ballistic missiles due to related advancements by North Korea, and of course China's deployment of intermediate-range ballistic missiles. The Maya class was developed with ballistic missile defense as a core requirement, while the earlier Congo and Otago classes received gradual upgrades against these threats. Moreover, Japan is building even larger air defense warships the size of a cruiser, with greater displacement than the 10,000 tons of its current Aegis destroyers. Without these high-end air warfare destroyers, the rest of the fleet, particularly its lighter escort units, would be dangerously exposed in open waters. Japan's post-war submarine force is a huge topic of its own, and we'll just cover it briefly here. The JMSDF exclusively fields diesel-electric submarines instead of nuclear submarines like those of the US and Russia. But Japan is at the forefront of conventional submarine technology. Their subs have a reputation for being very quiet, owing to extensive rafting measures. The bulk of the JMSDF submarines is the Soryu class, which is unusually large for a non-nuclear design, providing ample space for rafting and sound dampening measures, battery capacity, and air-independent propulsion, which allows a non-nuclear sub to remain submerged for much longer. Later boats of the Soryu class incorporated lithium-ion batteries, enabling longer underwater operation and faster recharging than typical lead-acid batteries. Conventional submarines are most vulnerable when they must surface or snorkel to recharge their batteries. So technology that reduces the time that they have to do that translates directly into greater survivability. Japan's newer subs, the Taige class, continue to use the lithium-ion batteries. In fact, Japanese confidence in these new batteries appear to be so high that they have dropped air-independent propulsion entirely on the Taige class, relying on lithium-ion batteries alone to minimize the time spent near the surface. So, when we evaluate the JMSDF across its core missions, anti-submarine warfare, air defense, ballistic missile defenses, and submarine capabilities, it becomes clear that Japan has built a powerful combat force when it comes to battles near home waters. It has a dense network of forces capable of detecting and neutralizing submarines approaching the Japanese home islands. It has interceptors able to shoot down ballistic missiles. It has a formidable mine countermeasure force of roughly 30 minesweepers, which is far greater mine warfare capacity than the US Navy. In terms of sheer firepower and the breadth of capabilities across the various domains of naval warfare, the JMSDF is rather powerful and capable. But naval power is not simply about winning fights near one's shores. For an island nation dependent on maritime trade, the defining test of its navy is whether it can secure the flow of goods coming from abroad. And here lies Japan's central strategic dilemma. The industrial base that fuels the Japanese economy is critically dependent on imported raw materials. Japan has negligible petroleum reserves of its own. It imports almost all crude oil from the Middle East. Even refined fuels largely originate from foreign refineries in Asia. Iron ore comes primarily from Australia. Liquefied natural gas arrives from Southeast Asia and the Gulf states. These supply lines pass through the South China Sea and through choke points that could be interdicted by a hostile power. If Japan were ever cut off from its maritime supply routes, that would be a disaster. For a state that depends on imported fuel, metals, chemicals, and food, secure trade routes are key to the state's survival. One might assume that a navy of Japan's size would be built not only to defend the home islands, but also to escort shipping across the wider Pacific. Yet, Japan's fleet is not constructed for that role. It lacks endurance and the necessary support vessels. Blue water operations depend on logistics ships, oilers, ammunition resupply ships, repair tenders, and command and support platforms that allow combatants to remain at sea for extended periods. The JMSDF has a surprisingly small fleet of such support ships. Their logistics fleet includes just 5 replenishment tankers, 2 large ones and 3 smaller ones, and a couple of submarine tenders. Logistics vessels represent about 15% of the JMSDF's overall tonnage. In contrast, the US Navy and the Chinese Navy devote about 1/3 to 40% of their tonnage to logistics and support units. Japan's fleet composition is strikingly lopsided. Many combatants and few logistics assets. In practical terms, this means Japan can deploy powerful fighting forces near Japan, but it cannot sustain operations far from home in any meaningful way. It also cannot defend distant shipping routes for meaningful periods. Adding to this limitation is the absence of nuclear-powered warships, especially nuclear-powered attack submarines. Nuclear submarines can remain submerged indefinitely, travel at high sustained speed underwater, and conduct long-duration patrols through distant waters. Diesel submarines, no matter how good, simply cannot replace them as open ocean units. Diesel subs could be quite vulnerable when it has to surface or snorkel in hostile waters, to say nothing of limitations in fuel supplies. Again, this means the lack of staying power and power projection. This is the heart of Japan's naval contradiction. It is powerful, but its power is geographically constrained. It can fight fiercely where it has access to friendly ports, where its ships can be refilled and resupplied with ammunition, and where air bases offer air cover. Beyond that perimeter, beyond the home islands, its combat power fades away rapidly. Thus, the JMSDF on its own cannot guarantee Japan's access to vital raw materials, nor can it secure its industrial lifelines in wartime. It is therefore incomplete as a strategic instrument. The reality is that Japan relies on the United States Navy to underpin its maritime security. Together, the US and Japan form a combined naval order in the Pacific. Japan's navy can deny waters close to home, defeat submarines, provide missile defense, and offer regional naval strength. The US Navy, with its carriers, logistics ships, and global reach, provides the long arm and the muscle necessary to secure Japan's trade routes. This division of roles is deliberate. From Washington's perspective, Japan helps bottle up Chinese and Russian submarines, while the United States maintains control over the open Pacific and beyond. If the US Navy withdrew, Japan's security architecture would be in shambles without a fundamental realignment to its foreign policy, simply because Japan lacks the ability to sustain itself in distant theaters. In the end, the Maritime Self-Defense Force is a navy defined by the tension between impressive technical capability and strategic limitations. It is very well equipped to defend the Japanese home islands against missiles and submarines. It can form dense defensive networks at home. Its hardware is modern, its sailors skilled, and it has a good balance of assets at a tactical level. But it cannot protect Japan's economic lifelines on its own, nor project force deep into the Pacific without American support. Its structure reflects assumptions about the durability of alliances. Perhaps Japan is confident that it need not build a true blue water navy because the United States already supplies that capacity. Perhaps Japan consciously accepts the status quo because it operates under an alliance framework that fills the naval gap. Yet, such confidence assumes that national interests remain aligned forever, and that alliances will endure. Whether that model remains viable in a future where great power rivalries intensify is a question that only time will answer.